Hola! Welcome to another edition of Orange Bloods Texas Football. I'm Jeff Ketchum. That is Anwar Richardson. It's K&A. It's a Tuesday. Thank you to Andy over at myperfectfranchise.net. Man, if you want to change your life, you want to start living the dream, you want to start running your own business, and you need a little bit of help to get you going in that direction, it's exactly what Andy does. Give him a call at 404-973-9901 or just email him, Andy at myperfectfranchise.net. He's the guy that can get the dream started for you if you need just a little bit of a push. Today, we're talking about Xavier Worthy, who at the end of his sophomore season on WAR has become a bit of a lightning rod in regards to it's a 6-4 season. It's not quite getting over the hump. And as people start to point fingers and try to figure out either excuses or reasons for why this team isn't quite hitting its stride in a way that would, have it maybe 8-2 or 7-3 at this stage and in a better position with regards to controlling itself and its destiny going into a Big 12 championship game type of setting. He seems to be getting a lot of fingers pointed in his direction. People are starting to talk about him in ways that don't feel befitting of a guy that has 21 touchdowns in 22 career games and leads the Big 12 this year in touchdown receptions and is generally regarded as one of the better wide receiver talents in the history of the program. People are at a point, I won't say all people, but there are people who are fed up with Xavier Worthy and feel like he is symbolic of what's happening inside the program right now. And I don't know how fair that is. And it's one of the reasons why he's the subject of today's K&A conversation.
It's interesting, because you go into, you talk about the build up to where we are right now. And one of the guys who kind of led the charge as far as recruiting Quinn Ewers to come here was Xavier Worthy, right? Yep. We remember when he changes his profile picture on Twitter, for something Quinn related in order to get him here. He becomes and it's supposed to be this dynamic duo of sorts. There's Brendan Marion is coming into town. And so, hey, he just had a Biletnikoff winner. So, hey, he had Jordan Addison. Maybe this happens here too. So you come into this thing and all of a sudden he's loved, he's beloved. And it shows kind of the fickle nature of sports a little bit, Ketch, where it becomes a what have you done for me lately kind of business. And, there's this finger pointing, and it's almost kind of like there's sides that are kind of being drawn. There's people who are saying, okay, Quinn's the problem. And that's why maybe a guy like Xavier Worthy isn't getting the yardage and the touchdowns and everything like that you would expect him to have. And then there's another side that's, saying, okay, well, Xavier's the problem. And maybe he's not fighting as hard on balls, and there's drops and things to that effect. And it's a weird thing where sometimes people don't think two things can be true, or some can't acknowledge that, if Xavier's targeted 14 times and he only has 4 receptions, how much of that is really on Xavier and how much of that is really on the quarterback? It's an interesting place. And then, the last thing I'll say on the catch, I'll toss it back to you. For the ultimate tiebreaker, you would hope for the coach to come out and say, hey, this is what this thing is. And when kind of given the opportunity on Monday, his tiebreaker kind of went a little bit more towards Quinn as far as Quinn has got thrown it to a spot and, basically saying that the receivers aren't being there. And then when I asked him for a little bit of a clarification, he started talking about some other things, like a Bill Walsh and the route trees and all these other kind of things, but never specifically said, nah, Xavier's doing it exactly where I want. It's odd to a certain degree. And so here we are with this topic of the conversation.
There's a lot to chew on with regards to what you just said. Before we chew on it even more, I just want to ask a follow-up question to yesterday's press conference. Mm-hmm. So the press conference takes place, and we did our Monday overreaction show, and we did talk a little bit about the topic that we're taking on right now, which is what he said about Xavier Worthy and Quinn Ewers and responsibility on deep passes and all of that. By last night, there were rumors on that dadgum internet that Xavier Worthy was going to transfer to USC. We literally, Orange Bloods as a staff, and it seems like it was mostly Jason Sukumel, but we, the staff, were getting phone calls from USC reporters who were asking, what do you guys know about this Xavier Worthy transferring to USC thing that's going on? Did we start that with our show and just talking about all of this? Or was this more of the fallout from, because the timing's just too interesting. That yesterday, Sukumel's getting phone calls from USC reporters asking about Xavier Worthy transferring to USC hours after that press conference, and a few hours less than you and I first taking on this discussion topic. I wondered, was it less rumor mill and more just continuation of conversation that we had? Or was, in your mind, do you think maybe there was a little baby fallout from what transpired yesterday?
I think people are just, trying to maybe just use logic as far as thinking is concerned, more so than anything else. I think it's clear that there's not a connection with Quinn and Xavier this season. So I think that becomes an obvious thing. There's the thought process that he's not happy. And, you said stuff sometimes you can see on his face. I don't necessarily get a chance to see that because I'm in the, watching the game. So I can't see facial expressions. And I have to rewatch the game today. But, I think it's a natural thought process. If you say to yourself, okay, this guy's from Cali, so that's close to home. Caleb Williams, is there. He's having another great season. I think it's just one of those. And hey, there was a potential that they may have gone to USC earlier this year, right? And so there was that thing that was out there that was on the table as far as the transfer option is concerned. So I think it's just logic to just double back and say, well, if this thing doesn't seem to be working here, maybe that's what's going on, right now. And in the era of the transfer portal, it's like free agency, right? Where NFL free agency, where you start thinking. When I covered the NFL and there were free agents, one of the things I would look at is like, well, what coaches were available that this guy may have worked with that he liked, and I start looking at little things like that. You start trying to connect some dots as to like who drafted him. Like, oh, well, this guy who drafted him is no longer in Tampa. He's actually a coach here in Detroit. That guy loved him. Let me go in and check him. I think that's what people are trying to do more so than like it was on us. I think it's just obvious, there's, it's something that you just have to be aware of.
So back to the conversation we were having prior to me kind of just wondering out loud about that. I think the truth is somewhere in the middle on this conversation piece. And the problem that we often get in these types of conversations is that nobody wants middle ground. It's got to be it's Quinn's fault, or it's Xavier's fault, or it's Sark's fault. And there's very little room for, well, Xavier can play better, and Quinn Ewers can play better, and Sarkisian can do a better job of meshing them together in ways that make that relationship easier and smoother. And there's a lot going on inside of that. I feel like I was one of the first to kind of baby call out Xavier Worthy a few weeks ago, while also calling him a fantastic player and, maybe the best player outside of Bijan Robinson on the Texas team. This is a guy that still does a lot of exceptional things. I mean, he does lead the Big 12 in touchdown receptions. And I'd have to go look and see what happened over the weekend. But going into this past weekend, he led that statistic by 3 touchdowns. And that's after not catching a touchdown in the first 3 games of the season, when the quarterback position was a revolving door after Quinn Ewers has his injury and Hudson Card's trying to get his feet underneath him. So, if he's getting good quarterback play, we're probably talking about Xavier Worthy having between 12 and 15 touchdown passes or receptions through 10 games. And yet it does feel like he hasn't quite progressed from last season. I think there are points of his game, and specifically the deep balls are really interesting because he's not a guy that when you watch Xavier Worthy run deep routes, he beats his guy and he's streaking down the field. And if the ball's not on target, Worthy's not really a guy that you see adjust his body, pull back, fight for the ball, desperately lunge at it. I mean, he's a guy that when he's finishing his route, he's got 3 or 4 steps on a guy. His expectations seem to be hit me in stride and I'm in the end zone. And it's as simple as that. There are other guys that don't have his speed that have to run deep routes better. The thing that I can't quite shake from yesterday, Anwar, is that if you're Sarkisian and you're telling me that Quinn Ewers is just throwing the ball where he's supposed to throw it, and the implication was the receiver isn't running to the spot where the ball is supposed to go, you got like 15 receivers on the roster. Put another one. Like, stop throwing it deep to him then. Then get a guy who runs to the spot better than he does. And where I struggle a little bit with really blaming or placing responsibility on Worthy for these deep throw issues is that there's no one else. If he's the problem, then put someone else in to try not to be the problem. They're not only not replacing Xavier Worthy, they're constantly trying over and over and over again in the game, same quarterback, same receiver. So the definition of insanity would be keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. If there's really a personnel issue to blame here, then I don't understand not having someone else be in that role who might be better suited to catch those passes. Some of this just doesn't pass the intellectual smell test.
Well, the thing is, Catch, kind of building on what you're saying, if it is Xavier and he's not getting to the spot, then that would mean that everybody else should be able there to get to the spot, even if it's not a deep route, right? Even if we're not talking deep routes, and we're just talking about just, more simplistic routes, that means everybody else. So that would mean that Quinn is connecting with every other receiver not named Xavier Worthy. And we're not coming out of games, Catch. We're saying, man, well, Jordan Whittington had, 10 receptions for, 180 yards today. And Jatavian had, 12 for this, and then just this guy here, he's just, what I'm saying? Like, so it can't just be all on him, where you don't see everybody else balling out, because if it's just him, then everybody else should be balling, right? But we're not
just one.
What? Yes,
one other guy.
We don't see that, so therefore that's where it's hard for me to just place it all on him and say, okay, this is all you, because it's like, well, no, it seems like nobody else is really eating at this moment. It seems like everybody else is a little bit hungry, right now. And so, and there's passes that are being missed. And this is where you start talking about, there's a little bit of everything going around. I'm sure Xavier would own the drops that he's had, this season. But there's been some overthrows that Quinn has had. I mean, there's certain things that's interesting when you talk about. It's like you said, maybe he doesn't fight for certain things or something, but he's got a lot of speed. Where if he's hauling ass down the field and he's expecting it to be here, and all of a sudden it's either going way over him or it's going to, like, that's a hard adjustment. Like, that's a hard adjustment. It's essentially, Catch, thinking about, your car and thinking about, the faster you go, the harder it is when you hit the brakes to just stop on a dime. Like me going through a school zone, driving at 20 miles an hour, that's easy for me to stop. Me going at 60 something, 75, and then you hit slam on the brakes, it's going to be a little bit harder. I'm not going to be. So there's another thing within that as well, where Quinn has to be more accurate. If it's drops, that's easy. That's on the receiver. Like, that is absolutely on the receiver. But like I said, I need to be seeing other guys ball out for me to put it on that. And by the way, I also need Sarkisian, when you talk about what else he can do as well in this whole like pie chart of blame. And you and I aren't putting percentages anywhere. Sark, stop calling it. Stop calling it. It's not working. For whatever reasons, it's not working. You can say you want to keep defensives honest. Well, if the defense knows it's not going to connect, they're not going to have to worry about being honest. All right. They just know that's a wasted play at that point. Call other things. And by the way, you and I will of course, stand in agreement. I'll throw it back to you on this. Bijan Robinson's kind of good. I mean, you can just, no one's going to be mad if you gave it to Bijan 30 times and to see what he can do. I'm just going to throw that out there as well.
Yeah, and look, there was an interesting exchange. Sark often says, I have to do a better job, but he doesn't always go into specifics into what that means. So I thought Cedric Golden yesterday kind of asked a question in a way that as soon as he asked it, I knew how Sarkisian would respond, and he did. Because he was asking Sarkisian, like, well, do you feel like you can give Bijan Robinson 30 touches in a game? And he was like, I literally did it 2 weeks ago. And there wasn't an attempt, there wasn't a chance for the follow-up of, well, why didn't that attitude permeate itself into this game? 0 passing game numbers for Bijan in this game. For a guy who's one of the all-purpose leaders in yards, rushing and receiving combined in the country, it didn't quite go that way. They try to use Xavier Worthy in a lot of the same ways that both the Kansas City Chiefs and the Miami Dolphins use Tyreek Hill. And one of the things that I would say about Tyreek Hill is he's literally having one of the greatest seasons of any receiver in the history of the game. But you don't often see him he's not having to stop his routes. He's not having to adjust. He's not having to fight for catches in traffic. That's not how they get him the ball. And I wonder if because of the way Quinn Ewers throws his deep ball, if they wouldn't be better suited to have someone slower running those routes for the reasons that you just outlined. Xavier's beating his guy, but he's beating his guy with borderline world-class speed. and just like you don't see Tyreek Hill slowing down and bodying defensive backs to catch the football, you see him catching it on the run and going. And I think that, at some point, the skill sets aren't meshing together. The way that Quinn throws his deep ball versus Xavier Worthy's skill set just aren't matching. That they keep trying it over and over and over again and not tweaking anything without it, and it's just not coming off. Did you see the stats on Quinn that I posted in the Slack channel from last night?
I did. I absolutely did.
A statistician went on to Twitter yesterday. I'm going to pull this up, and he was looking at where did he get these numbers from? I want to make sure that I say he was getting them from a statistical database. And it's talking about Quinn Ewers when throwing the ball down the field 10 plus yards. He got these numbers from @football_sis, which is an analytical service that NFL teams, media, people subscribe to get information. Quinn Ewers, when throwing balls 10 or more yards down the field, has a 40% completion rate, which ranks 112th in the country. And on throws of 10 or plus yards down the field, he has a catchable pass rate of 59%, which is 126th in the country. When Quinn Ewers is in a clean pocket, right? So when everything is set up for him to throw the ball well, his completion rate is 58%, which ranks 131st in the country. And his catchable pass rate is 79%, which ranks 130th. We're talking about numbers that would indicate in this particular area of the game, he's as bad as any quarterback in college football. That's not me with a subjective take. That's me looking at the data and going, when you rank 131st and 130th and 126th and 112th in some really important metrics. That ain't good. And then this guy posted Hudson Card's numbers by comparison. And whereas on the 10 plus yards downfield deal where Quinn Ewers is a 40% completion rate, Hudson Card's at 47%. And where Quinn Ewers has a 59% catchable pass rate, Hudson Card's at 72%. And then you look at the clean pocket numbers where Quinn Ewers has a 58% completion rate, Hudson Card has a 72% completion rate. And then when you look at the 79% catchable pass rate, Hudson Card's at 89%. In these metrics, Hudson Card is better across the board than Quinn Ewers in these metrics that have been pulled. I have a hard time pointing the finger at Xavier Worthy with regards to why this stuff isn't working out when the numbers suggest, when we're talking about why aren't these plays coming off, and then you look at the quarterback and see that he's 130th in the country in terms of throwing catchable balls. I mean, it's just staring right at you at that point. And it was interesting yesterday that Ewers is being protected by Steve Sarkisian to such a degree that yesterday he was like, no, his mechanics are fine. And then a couple of hours later, Quinn Ewers is asked about his mechanics, and he's like, they got to be better. We're at a point where the coach is covering for his quarterback on really obvious things to the point that the quarterback shows up later and contradicts the coach. We didn't hear the coach come to Xavier Worthy's defense yesterday and say, look, Xavier's open. He's open. We have to find a way to complete those passes because they're there to be completed. And instead, it was a little bit of Xavier Worthy being thrown under the bus, just a little bit. But when he said Quinn is throwing the ball to the right spots and we're not completing them, the implications were what the implications were. Xavier's in a place now where his body language is such that people are reading into his body language what they want to such a degree that they're ignoring science. They're ignoring, this really isn't on him, but because he's visibly showing his frustration and not finishing out routes aggressively, they're pointing the finger at him in ways that I think are completely unfair because the data suggests it's a quarterback issue. And if it's a quarterback issue, the coach has to be able to find a way to adjust. And that's not happening. And we're coming out of the other side blaming the guy who's doing the hard thing really well. He's getting wide open.
Which is hard to do. It's just hard to do. It's hard to get separation. It really is.
Double teamed. He's got the other team's best DB on him. He's getting wide open and plays aren't getting completed. And what's happening is people are looking at his body language and now they're saying he's not a good team player. He should transfer. They got to find somebody else. And I feel like you and I are in the middle of like wackadoodle world where the thesis statements that are being created by people watching the games don't match everything else that we're watching.
You know, it's interesting because you said that there was also a tweet over the weekend from Joel Klatt who said Ewers has to clean up his footwork, no foundation, and feet constantly drifting. That is why he misses high over the middle, right? So there's been some folks who have said like, well, wait a second, it's what the quarterback needs to be done, and I don't think it's a huge badge of shame to say a young quarterback who's only been in 6 games or something like that has room for improvement. Like that's not throwing dirt on a guy. Yeah. That's not throwing shade on a guy. That's not saying he sucks. It's stating the facts, which is he's a young quarterback that has to improve, that literally if now we go back and just you keep it buck. Okay, he's a quarterback who didn't play his senior year of high school, who basically, had some, did some drills at Ohio State. And then this is like his first live action in about 2 years with elite guys, like elite receivers. Like, no disrespect to anyone he played with in high school, they aren't as good as Xavier Worthy. And so because of that, like, we've got to say, okay, it's an adjustment that's going to happen, that needs to happen. And so it doesn't mean that Quinn can't be and live up to everything, but just right now, he's young and he's figuring it out. No disrespect. The danger is when you protect one person so much and ignore and then crap on someone else, that becomes the danger, because for every one catch that says Xavier can just go, like, we don't care, we don't need him. Imagine a world next season when you don't have Jordan Whittington or Xavier Worthy. Like, walk into that reality for a second, Catch, and who's your top guy? Like Isaiah Nayor, and then everybody else is trying to fit in. Like, you can talk yourself into some guys, but you and I both know we've done this a lot and long enough to know sometimes when you think, oh man, like easily replaceable, like it doesn't always work out that way.
And you never say it about a guy that's scoring double-digit touchdowns. You usually say it about somebody who's at like half that rate, and then you're like, anybody can score 5 touchdowns in a season, and then it doesn't always quite come off. Texas fans need to slow down, and they really need to realize every team in the country would take Xavier Worthy in a heartbeat.
Definitely.
Nick Saban is not playing for an SEC championship this year, in part because he doesn't have an Xavier Worthy after, for the last 5 or 6 years, having 3 or 4 on every team, it seems like. I mean, part of their problem against Texas was they didn't have receivers that could get open. They got the quarterback that can get them the ball. They don't have receivers that he could get the ball to. Ohio State is loaded, but he fits the profile of I think about that Michigan team right now. They're competing for a national championship. You can make the case that a guy like Xavier Worthy, had he stayed at Michigan, add him to Blake Corum and everything else they have on that offense, that might be the difference between playing for a national championship and not. Texas has an NFL player at wide receiver.
Yeah.
That's part of the good thing you have in the program. I think Texas fans need to be really careful. It's one thing to say, look, Xavier Worthy can make improvements. There's still room for growth there as a player. Xavier will sign off on that. I mean, he dropped a couple of passes. He'll be the first one to show up and say, I got to catch the ball better. He holds himself to an incredibly high standard. To point fingers, though, when this season is over with, and for there to be a feeling that Xavier Worthy's one of the reasons why this thing didn't work out, I think you got to be extremely careful. I'm reading some of the things that are being said on social media and Orange Bloods right now, and I'm thinking to myself, within this transfer portal era, you're going to run that guy off because he's going to say, for who? For what? I'm giving to the team. I'm giving to my teammates. I'm donating money to charity to my teammates to help them out. I share everything that I can. And you guys, and when I say you guys, it may just be like a smattering of people, but sometimes the loudest smatterings of people are the ones that stand out the most. And I just think that it would be bad for the Texas football program if Xavier Worthy isn't on this team in a year from now. He has to be part of the solution. If he's not, next year's team, which already has to replace a lot of really vital cogs to a 6-4 team, you don't want when you go into building next year's team, you want that guy to be part of what you can immediately take to the bank. Well, what do we have? Well, we got one of the best receivers in college football. We're good there. To lose that and over some silliness, over a rush to anoint blame in a situation that's kind of complicated, because He could do better. The quarterback can obviously do better. The coaches can do better. There's a whole lot of everybody involved can do better. In the name of somebody has to assume the most blame, pointing it at the player who can't throw the ball to himself is dangerous. And if you're a Texas fan watching this video, what I would tell you is in the future, when you see this, nip that in the bud. Make sure people know that's just stupid. It's stupid to look at the game on Saturday night and the offense only scores 3 points and to come away saying, well, our receiver that can't throw the ball to himself is the biggest problem and is the guy that if we're going to scapegoat is the guy that we need to scapegoat. I would suggest there's nobody that needs to be scapegoated. Nobody needs to be the reason for blame. There's a lot of stuff intertwined here that needs improvement. But if you're asking me, and this will probably be a controversial take, if you held a gun to my head and said, will Xavier Worthy play for Texas next season? As of this very second, if my life depended on it, I'd say no. But I would say no at this point because I do think the negativity is something that he will see, he will read, he will feel, he won't think it's fair. And I think that as much as anything, my son is 8 years old and he has this sense of righteousness on War where don't blame him for something that he didn't do. If he did something, he's really good about, I did it, I'm in trouble. He doesn't lie. My son doesn't lie about things. But if you blame him for something that he didn't do, he will throw the biggest fit. He has problems in class where the whole classroom will get into trouble for talking. And when the teacher says, you guys were talking, Hendricks will say, no, I wasn't. And he will not. He has a hard time allowing himself to be blamed for something that in his mind he didn't do. Blame me for what I did, but by God, don't accuse me of something that I didn't do. And I think Xavier is wired a little bit that way. He's wired to assume a lot of responsibility. But don't blame him for things that aren't his fault. And I think Xavier Worthy woke up on Sunday morning feeling like there were plays to be made down the field. There were plays that the offense could have made, but it ain't my fault that we didn't complete passes down the field. And if on Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday, you're pointing the finger at him and saying it was your fault, and oh, by the way, your body language is awful, I think he's the kind of guy that instinctively, from a personality standpoint, will push back on that. And I would understand it. Just like I understand where my son Hendricks is coming from when he just doesn't want to be blamed for things that he didn't do. I don't think my son is an outlier in that. I don't think any of us like to be blamed for things that we haven't done, but I think some people take it more personal than others. I'm at a point in my life where I get blamed for a lot of things and I don't like it, but I'm comfortable with it because I'm used to it. Xavier Worthy's like 19 years old and probably hasn't been blamed for a lot of things football related in his lifetime. And I wonder how he's absorbing all of this. I can't imagine it's his favorite thing in the world.
Well, there's a couple of things I want to address as far as what you said, right? So when people may dismiss what you said and say, well, that's just fans. Like fans don't matter. But you know who also are fans? People from these collectives, these NIL people who are cutting checks, they're fans. So if the narrative is out there that he's not doing this, he's doing this, and all the negative words that are being associated with that we're hearing, the people who cut the checks are hearing that as well. So you can't necessarily that you start messing with someone's money when the boss thinks, and it's not a boss, but you get what I'm saying. So let me just stay with the check, but of the people who cut checks starts thinking this whole narrative is true. Well, that affects NIL opportunities for Xavier, next year. Like that it just does. And they're like, man, he's lazy. Man, he ain't fighting for stuff. Man, Quinn's throwing the ball perfectly and he can't get it. Like, why you want me to cut a check for this guy? Like, I'm not going to do that. So I think we got to be very careful when you, like I said, it's not just a fan thing. There's a bigger thing in play in this modern era of NIL. The second thing that I think you and I both know from our personal experience when we had an NIL deal with the Worthy family, they ain't about negativity.
They're not.
Like they're about a lot of things, but they are not about that negative stuff. They don't want negative energy. They don't want negative vibes. They are not about that world of negativity. They just want to stay focused on the task at hand. They want to stay positive. But if you're going to bring some negativity to them, they are out. they
no, you couldn't be any more right.
You know what I'm saying? Like they were like, yeah, it's cool what you guys do. We're not down with that. Like we're not down. You guys are sometimes a little bit too negative. Cool, do what you guys do. No problem. We're done. And I respect that. You respect that. We respect them as a family, but we know from a personal dealing with them, don't bring that shit to them. It ain't gonna fly. And so I think over the next couple of weeks, you got to be careful when you're dealing with a person that thought about leaving previously. Like I got to put that back on the table. Thought about it. It's kind of like sometimes you're in a relationship. Then you tell someone, I'm going to break up with them, and they convince you of all the reasons why you should stay in this relationship. But a lot of times in the back of your head, you're like, okay, let's see what happens. Then when they start doing things and things start going wrong, you start thinking, man, I should have broke up with this blankety blank a long time ago. Like I was going to do it before, and here I am again. I got sucked it. All right, let me just go ahead. Let me get through the holidays. And then when we get into January, I'm out. Now, if you're smart, you get rid of her before the holidays. So this way you don't have to buy her a present. Totally different subject for a totally different day. So just bringing some levity to it. So I'm just saying, like, you can't ignore that. Hey, like to your point, you made this point, and I thought it was a really excellent point the other day. You said, hey, he didn't grow up a Texas fan. Like a lot of these kids did. He grew up loving UT, wearing burnt orange. The Sam Ellinger pictures
State
that we all
pride.
remember. All that kind of stuff. Like he's here, because of he believes in Sarkeesian. Austin's cool. Like that's where we're at. And so the other thing that you got to be careful about in this whole process is they have bigger goals. Like Xavier wasn't playing the NFL, and Xavier is a future NFL player. We know that. Like there's no debate about that. But if you got a quarterback who, if they feel like he can't get them the ball, if they feel catch, if they're waking up today feeling like, you know what, Casey Thompson got us the ball a lot better than Quinn is doing. Because say what you want to say, last year with Casey and Hudson, Xavier is nearly 1,000-yard receiver. He's at 981 last
and that's season. Still with a bunch of balls that got overthrown or underthrown or not thrown.
There was a mixtape that got dropped of all of Casey's overthrows. Remember that mixtape?
Yes.
I mean, who can't forget that? But that mixtape got dropped, and we saw all the overthrows.
It's the same deal this year. And a year ago, nobody was blaming Xavier Worthy.
Yeah. What's
weird is that it's the same mixtape. And now this is what happens when you run into – this is what happens when your five-star quarterback is involved, because then the confirmation bias kicks in, and Casey Thompson – felt disposable by Texas fans last year. Oh, he could transfer. We'll get somebody else. He's not Sark's guy. So it's kind of funny when you make the mixtape and the balls aren't being completed. But this year, it's why. This will be my final statement, and we can wrap this thing up. It's why these next two games and the bowl game are really important. To end on a positive note, to end on an upward trajectory. It's important that at the end of the season, if you're Sark and you're having a conversation with Xavier Worthy and you say, look, there's an ebb and flow to the season, and you don't get too high with the highs, and you don't get too low with the lows. It's really important that how you feel today isn't how you feel about the whole process of the season. It's important they end on a good note because Xavier Worthy will have some conversations both inside his own head and with his family and friends and everything else. And it's important that there be some like really positive things to lean into if you're Texas going into next season. You don't want this season to end and for Xavier Worthy to be feeling miserable. And Xavier Worthy is a guy that, from what we know of him, I think he's pretty even keel. I think he leans into negativity more, which is why they don't want it. He's not a guy that I think goes out and over celebrates catching 10 passes for 200 yards and 3 touchdowns. That's what he expects from himself. It's when he comes short of these incredibly lofty personal goals that this is a guy that last year entered the season saying 1,000 yards, 10 plus touchdowns. I don't care that that's never been done before by a Texas freshman wide receiver. Those are the goals for myself. So, he would have had high goals this season. He's not hitting them. And I think that his personality is such that would bother him more than he would be uplifted by surpassing his goals. I think he's a guy that if he was surpassing his goals, he would change his goals and make them harder. If 1,500 yards is the goal and he's at 1,500 with 2 games to go, he's lifting the bar and trying to chase something else. And I think that this program and the fan base, everybody's got to get behind Xavier Worthy now. Stop trying to assess blame. Get behind your player and support him and make sure he feels the love between now and the end of the season. Or I don't want to continue to issue this warning, but it's obvious. He has options. He will have options. And you don't want to be in a position where over Christmas he's exploring those options. You want him to be opening UT presents under the tree, not asking for gift cards or trying to send those things back where they came from because of a state of mind that's not in a good place.
Yeah, and and just to build off of that, Catch, I think the person who's also got to make sure that Xavier's feeling the love is Steve Sarkisian, and not behind closed doors, not where anyone can't see it. I'm talking about out in front, out in public. Like Steve Sarkisian has got to let the world know that's my dude. I got no problems with him. He's doing everything that I want. Like you got to feel the love because it's natural human emotions, Catch. If one person gets praised and the other one doesn't, you're just natural. Like what the hell is going on? Like what I'm doing this, or one person is seemingly getting the blame and the other person is getting like defended. This is natural. Like for real. So this is how you feel about me? This is what it is. So I think Steve's over the next couple of weeks when he has his Thursday press conference, whatever, he's got to make it clear. And if it's hard for him to toe that line, then he's got to do the ultimate thing that coach does. Just say it's on me. Just knock it all out and say, I'm the person. It's on me. I've got to do a better job. These guys are working hard. They're doing everything they need to do in practice, but it's on me. If these guys aren't succeeding, it's a me thing. It's not on them. It's a me thing. He's got to be the one that falls on the sword at that moment. Because, first of all, it's and the last things I'll say, but, Xavier's never struck me as a diva, so I don't want to put that diva.
No, I agree.
On him, but he's a human.
Yep.
He's a human like everybody else. And, you can't just shit on people and just expect them to take it. Like at some point, they're going to say, all right, enough's enough. To your point, I got options. I'll see what's out there. So I think for me, Catch, I think this is a Steve Sarkisian when you're talking about the importance of managing a locker room and managing players and managing stars, right? Because you're really imagining Quinn is a star, whether and it may not just be because of the production, just who he is, because of the name, the label. Everyone knows who Quinn Ewers is. That's what it is. And then we got another person who is a star as well. You got to be able to manage that, though. And you've got to be able to, that's part of it. So he's got to think back to his NFL days when you've had, stars on a team. How do you manage that, not only behind closed doors, but in public? I think that's really important going forward.
On Thursday, when he speaks to the media, it would behoove Steve Sarkisian to show up at his Thursday press conference and talk about Xavier Worthy like he's Roshan Johnson. For myself, because there are guys that he will sing praises of until he turns blue in the face. It doesn't seem like Xavier Worthy yet is one of those people. For myself and Anwar Richardson, do us a solid. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, get notifications, tell your friends and family about it. Like the best Christmas gift that you can give them in addition to Rogue products or hooking them up with myperfectfranchise.net and maybe pushing somebody over the line of, I'm thinking about owning my own business, to getting them there is spreading the goodness of the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. Let's set the table. Just as a reminder, we will have an announcement in the next 24 hours about a new contributor to the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. And by the time you see this video, that announcement may even be out. Anwar will have Drunk Uncle Wednesday night, Modcast on Thursday. It's a typical week in the Orange Bloods Texas football channel. Kind of, that's what we do. Daily content to entertain and inform you. Hopefully that's been the case today. Until next time, by the way, Anwar, I totally dig that shirt.
Thank you.
Guys be good to each other. We'll see you later. Goodbye.